Okay, welcome everyone. Um, Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm Jordana Gessler, Vice President of Education and Exhibits at Holocaust Museum LA, the first and oldest survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. We were founded in 1961 by a group of Holocaust survivors who wanted to create a safe place to display their precious artifacts, to remember their family members and loved ones who had perished, and to educate future generations on the important lessons of the Holocaust. Today, the museum continues to provide free Holocaust education to students from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of our founders to commemorate, educate, and inspire a more humane and dignified world. Our mission and work in inspiring a more dignified world is more important than ever. As we mourn the loss of life at Robb Elementary School, we were reminded of the deep insight and profound intellect of children that need to be protected. They are our future. Today, I was reading thank you notes mailed to us by schools across the country who have gone on virtual tours of the museum and heard from survivors over Zoom. And I received one from Alexandra, a middle school student from Derby, Kansas, who had attended a virtual museum tour and survivor talk. In her thank you note, she wrote, "What you did made children like me want to stop racism and cruelty to everyone even more. We must continue to listen to the future of our country like Alexandra and stop racism and cruelty." Tonight's program is presented in conjunction with our special exhibition, Hidden History, Recounting the Shanghai Jewish Story, which is on exhibit at the museum now. It tells the little-known history of the diverse resettled Jewish community in Shanghai, including Iraqi Jews who arrived in the mid-1800s, Russian Jews who fled pogroms at the turn of the century, and German and Austrian Jews who desperately escaped the Nazis. In 1946, shortly after liberation, renowned photographer and photojournalist Arthur Rothstein was sent to Shanghai to document the recently liberated Hongkou Ghetto. His work is a core part of our exhibition. We are joined this evening by Rothstein's daughter, Dr. Anne Rothstein Segan. Anne holds a PhD in interdisciplinary studies with a focus in expressive arts for healing and social change. For the last 10 years, she has served as the director of the Arthur Rothstein Legacy Project, working to promote her father's photographic legacy through exhibitions and education. At the end of her talk, we will have time for a Q&A. So please, while she's speaking, think of some questions and put them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Now, without any further ado, I welcome Anne.
Thank you, Jordana, for your kind introduction, and thank you to the Holocaust Museum LA for hosting this remarkable exhibition, Hidden History, Recounting the Shanghai Jewish Story. Photographs by my father, Arthur Rothstein, are an important part of the exhibition, and my presentation today, Hidden History Revealed, will illuminate some of the stories behind his images. I will focus on my dad's pivotal role in the New Deal photo documentary project that became our nation's collective visual memory of the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl. And for those of you who haven't seen the exhibition yet, I urge you to visit the Holocaust Museum LA this summer. The exhibition remains open until August 28th. Thousands of Jewish families survived World War II by escaping to Shanghai. The experience of fleeing to Shanghai was an odyssey. During Passover in the spring of 1946, my father photographed the Shanghai community, and he was there on assignment for the United Nations relief agency called UNRWA. The United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration was the whole name. I hope my presentation will enrich your visit to the exhibition. This presentation will reveal some little-known history, details and clues that may be found in my father's photographs if you look very carefully. So I'll also give you some insights into Arthur Rothstein's own history and career before and after the war. This collage contains a selection of his countless press passes and identification cards. It reflects the breadth of his 50-year career. Finally, I'll share a surprising story about how my dad revisited his Shanghai photo assignments suddenly and very unexpectedly 25 years later. The Jewish refugee community in Shanghai included about 20,000 people, each of them uprooted by Nazi terror in Europe. Most were from Germany and Austria, but there were also Italians, Czechs, Poles, and others. By the fall of 1938, most countries closed their doors to Jewish refugees. Quietly, news circulated that the international settlement in Shanghai was one of the very few remaining places on Earth where a refugee could enter without a visa. If only you could get there. After Kristallnacht, in November 1938, even those who departed Europe with permission were stripped of money, belongings, and citizenship as they departed for Shanghai. Every European family that reached Shanghai had completed an arduous journey halfway around the world. This map shows how members of the Kolber family reached Shanghai. Some family members traveled from Vienna through Berlin to Moscow, and then a week-long journey on the Trans-Siberian Railway to Manchuria, and then by ship to Shanghai. Others in the family were able to obtain steamship tickets for the month-long journey from Italy through the Suez Canal and then across the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea to Shanghai. Wow, what a trip. The Shanghai Jewish story took place against a backdrop of unimaginable loss, but it also includes elements of hope and compassion. Many Shanghai survivors did not speak of their odyssey for a generation. But now, personal memoirs and academic histories are becoming published. And exhibitions like this one are bringing documents and personal artifacts into the light. This important story is being preserved and retold for the next generation. Here is a quick glimpse of the exhibition now at the Holocaust Museum, LA. One section encapsulates the lengthy Shanghai Odyssey of 5 families. Another section represents my dad's intimate 1946 Shanghai photo essay. For 5 families, the Shanghai saga extended over a decade or more. They were uprooted and fled Europe. They survived through very difficult years in Shanghai, and in 1946 they were uprooted again by the approaching Chinese Civil War. They were told they had to depart China and were forced to immigrate again to find a permanent home. Rather than tell you more about this saga, I just urge you to visit the exhibition, read the stories, see the previously hidden history revealed in the wonderful collection of documents and personal artifacts. And be sure to listen to the recorded testimonies. These stories, captured on this side of the gallery, cover the entire decade-long saga experienced by the families featured in the exhibition. On the other side of the gallery, you'll see my father's picture story that captures a brief but pivotal moment in the life of this community. My dad's photos show day-to-day activities in what's referred to as the Shanghai Ghetto section of the city. Most Jewish refugees had been forced to live there beginning shortly after Pearl Harbor. In the ghetto area known as Hangqiu, food and medicine were scarce. Life went on, but it was a daily battle with disease and severe overcrowding. Hangqiu was not a murderous place like the Nazi-controlled ghettos of Europe, but the Japanese military had controlled Shanghai with brutality. When my father made these photographs in April of 1946, it was just 6 months after the war's end. A sense of relief was palpable. Japanese forces had occupied and oppressed Shanghai for 8 long years, but now American troops were in control and were shipping the Japanese home. And yet, most of the refugees were unsettled and uncertain. European refugees in Shanghai found it very difficult to learn the fate of family members left behind. Non-Chinese were being told they would have to leave Shanghai immediately, and many Jewish refugees felt that it was not safe to return to Europe. Many had no money and no papers. Their saga was like a 3-act drama. They had lived through 2 acts, the escape from Nazi terror and the survival in Shanghai. And now the curtain was rising on their 3rd act. But the exhausted refugees were apprehensive. How and where would they end up? As I mentioned, Arthur Rothstein was in Shanghai as the chief photographer in China for the UN Relief Agency. He had requested leave from the Army Signal Corps to take this job. He saw the need to document and publicize many problems in post-war China. This included the plight of the Jewish refugees who were now stranded in Shanghai. Dad believed that by telling their story with photographs, he could help them get the assistance they needed. At the time, he was just 30 years old, but he was already a seasoned social documentarian. He had spent 10 years on the road as a photographer for the government agencies, for Look magazine, and for the Army. Now let's go back and examine my father's own hidden history. We'll explore what led him to Shanghai and then later to an illustrious 40-year career shaping the visual culture of post-war America. My father's parents had been forced from their homes in Eastern Europe by government-sanctioned anti-Jewish pogroms. They joined the wave of 2 million Jews who immigrated to America from 1890s to the 1920s. Arthur Rothstein was born in 1915 and was raised in a Yiddish-speaking home in New York City. That's him on the left at about 10 years old. There he is. Hi, Dad. His family stories about pogroms and his parents' struggle to resettle in America contributed to his lifelong fascination with the plight of migrants, refugees, and people dispossessed by forces beyond their control. Through his work, he helped repair the world in accordance with the Jewish concept of tikkun olam. For him, this was synonymous with the notion of taking action in pursuit of social justice. Arthur became fascinated with photography when he received a camera for his bar mitzvah. At 15, he graduated from Stuyvesant High School in New York City. That's him front and center, still in short pants in his high school graduation picture. Back then, it was custom for boys to wear short pants until they were 16. There's Dad in his short pants. In 1931, Dad entered Columbia University. Having just turned 16, he founded the University Camera Club. Here they are, posing on the newly opened George Washington Bridge. At Columbia, Dad met faculty member Roy Stryker, who would change the direction of his life. Stryker was writing a heavily illustrated textbook, and he hired Arthur to make photocopies for the book. However, before he could finish the book, Stryker was called to Washington, D.C. to work for the Roosevelt administration. His job was to document the need for government programs and to show their impact on the daily lives of Americans. Stryker believed that photographs held enormous potential for advancing social justice and education. So he assembled a team of photographers referred to as his photo unit. Arthur Rothstein was the first of more than 24 photographers hired by Roy Stryker, shown here on the right. That's Roy. Dad designed and built the team's photo lab and was soon going out on photo assignments all over the country. Stryker's photography project endured from 1935 to 1943, even as it moved among government agencies. The photo unit began in the Resettlement Administration. In 1937, it was merged into the Farm Security Administration, or FSA, and was thereafter known as the FSA Photo Unit. 5 years later, in 1942, the FSA Photo Unit was transferred to the Office of War Information as America mobilized for war. Roy Stryker was an academic, and he made sure that his photographers were knowledgeable about each of their assignments. He ran his photo unit like a graduate-level seminar with lots of assigned reading and even quizzes, and Dad loved that. For instance, if Dad was going to shoot in an area where cotton was grown, he was expected to read all about cotton production in J. Russell Smith's Encyclopedia, North America. Each of the photographers owned a copy of this book. They couldn't Google anything, right? Dad was also, he also had to understand the history and the culture of cotton growing. The photographers' research made them better visual storytellers. During these formative years, my father was developing the skills he used throughout his career to create compelling picture stories. One of Dad's first big assignments was not far from Washington, D.C. The Resettlement Administration was locating families out of the hills of Virginia to make way for what would soon become Shenandoah National Park. In the parkland, high up in mountain hollows, families were living in isolated, primitive conditions. I think he was especially empathetic towards these people who would soon be displaced and forced to deal with the outside world. In 1936, Arthur was in Oklahoma, in the Panhandle, documenting the Dust Bowl. Drought conditions forced hundreds of thousands to abandon their farms and migrate westward. Dad photographed the Coble family farm. When a dust storm began to kick up the sandy soil, the farmer and his 2 young sons ran for the house, and Dad ran for his car. He turned around to wave goodbye and took this picture. It became an iconic symbol of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression, and was one of the most widely reproduced photographs of the 20th century. Dad spent much of the next 8 years traveling around the country on photo assignments that could last for weeks or months. He told me he was often lonely and homesick on the road. But then he'd run into someone like Vernon Evans here. Dad photographed him near Missoula, Montana on Highway 10. He and his family left their grasshopper-ridden and drought-stricken farm in South Dakota for a new start in Oregon. They expected to arrive in time for hop picking. En route, they lived in a tent and covered about 200 miles a day in their Model T Ford. Meeting people like Vern and his family gave Dad's mission renewed purpose. Arthur's photographs appeared in newspapers and magazines across the country. Here's a good example. The New York Times used Dad's images in this 1936 story about the Dust Bowl and how the government was responding to the crisis. Stryker trained his photographers to be sociologists with cameras. They used their photographs to draw attention to ongoing social issues such as child labor and widespread drought conditions in the West that forced this North Dakota family from their dusty farm. Images from the FSA photo unit showed city dwellers and the desperation on farms out west. And it showed examples of city life to rural people. This is a section of the Bronx not far from where Arthur grew up. Many people in this neighborhood were unemployed garment workers. The Resettlement Administration created a community in New Jersey especially for them. The FSA recruited a handful of unemployed Jewish garment workers from this community to resettle with their families in an experimental cooperative. They were relocated to a rural farming community called Jersey Homesteads in Monmouth County, New Jersey. The planned community included new housing and an elementary school shown in this photo. It was designed as a triple cooperative. It included industry, which was a garment factory, plus farmland and a retail outlet. This was part of a long-standing effort by multiple Jewish organizations and labor unions to create farming communities for Jewish immigrants. The cooperatives experienced only limited success. The innovative housing was built by architect Louis Kahn. Amazing, huh? Shortly after FDR's death, the community was renamed Roosevelt, New Jersey. The FSA photographers created a broad portrait of America and a national historical record. This farmer is planting corn in Nebraska. Dad enjoyed photographing cowboy life, which seemed very exotic to a kid from the Bronx. On assignment for the FSA, Arthur continued to develop his ability to visually document a community. This parade is in downtown Butte, Montana. As I mentioned earlier, Stryker's FSA photo unit was merged into the Office of War Information, or OWI. The OWI created picture stories that inspired Americans to support the war effort. Arthur also began to experiment with the new Kodachrome color film. This image shows pilots in training for the military at Meacham Field in Texas. Roy Stryker and his photo unit team were constantly experimenting with creative ways to publish or exhibit photographs in support of their mission. The photo unit installed this stirring photo collage in Grand Central Terminal in New York City during World War II. It incorporated several of Dad's photographs along with an inspirational quotation, the last line from Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. It was designed to create an emotional impact, and it certainly did. It was the largest such photo mural ever produced up to that time. This is so beautiful. That government by the people shall not perish from the earth. After 8 years, the photo unit had taken more than 180,000 photographs. It's difficult to overstate the lasting impact of Roy Stryker's New Deal photography project, as reflected in the title of this book, which happens to have a picture of my dad on the cover. Eventually, images from the photo unit were used so widely that they shaped the nation's collective visual memory of that era. The work of Stryker's team set the standard for all subsequent photo documentary projects. Stryker also had the foresight to ensure that the entire collection would be permanently preserved at the Library of Congress, where it remains available today. You can go online and look at these pictures. During World War II, Dad served in the U.S. Army Signal Corps. Arthur was an instructor, a combat photographer, and a photo officer. He received orders to serve in the China, Burma, India theater. Initially, he was stationed in India. He was still in India when the war in Europe ended in May of 1945. Here he is reading the news. He loved taking pictures of himself by setting the camera's timed shutter release and running into the shot, which is what he did here. Meanwhile, the war raged on in Asia, which is where he was. In the final months of the war, Dad, now Lieutenant Rothstein, traveled with a military convoy over the famous Burma Road from India to China. Parts of the road, like this segment in China, were treacherous, often muddy, with no guardrails. If you look very closely, you can see that each small dot on this road is a large army truck. Dad said that the trip was scary as hell, but the scenery was breathtaking. When World War II ended in August of 1945, Arthur was stranded in China by the post-war transportation bottleneck. His duties as Chief Signal Corps photographer in China were winding down. So he requested leave from the Signal Corps to take an assignment as chief photographer in China for the United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration, known as UNRWA. The job entailed documenting the agency's massive post-war relief efforts. UNRWA had committed more than $600 million to China to rebuild infrastructure and to assist millions of people affected by widespread famine and displacement. Arthur Rothstein's experience with the FSA photo unit prepared him perfectly for this photo assignment. On behalf of UNRWA, Dad traveled extensively in China, documenting the famine. He knew that his pictures could help rally famine relief, but he said he was extremely distressed to see so many people on the verge of starvation without being able to help them directly. All they could do is take their picture. He also photographed UNRWA relief efforts like this distribution of rice and flour. After the war, UNRWA assumed special responsibility for assisting the Jewish refugees in Shanghai, along with the American Joint Distribution Committee, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and others. This photograph shows one of the entrance gates to the former Shanghai Ghetto area. After the war, the wall was decorated with Allied flags and a big V commemorating the Allied victory. See, there's the V right there. Here's another bit of hidden history in one of Dad's Shanghai pictures. After some in-depth research, we confirmed that the chess player on the left is Charles Jordan, the regional director of the American Joint Distribution Committee. He was there to supervise relief that the JDC was providing to the Jewish refugees. Mr. Jordan continued his work in international relief for many years after the war, but he was murdered in Prague in 1967, and the murder remains unsolved. This photograph is included in the exhibition. It shows the meager living space of a refugee couple. 6 months after the war ended, they were still living in their overcrowded housing in the Shanghai Ghetto area. They are about to enjoy matzo balls made on a traditional charcoal-heated Chinese fire pot. If you look closely, in the lower right corner, you'll see an interesting detail. There it is. There's the interesting detail. It's a box of Passover matzah, most likely a gift from one of the Jewish relief agencies. Here's one of Arthur Rothstein's images from his Shanghai photo essay that is not included in the current exhibition. It shows a communal sink in an alleyway that was shared by many families. Although running water was available in Shanghai, it was not safe to drink from the tap, and it had to be boiled first. This was one of the many challenges faced by the residents of the community. After the war, news arrived very slowly to the stranded refugees in China. In Europe, relief agencies were attempting to reunite Holocaust survivors with their families. In this poignant photograph, Jewish refugees in Shanghai search lists of concentration camp survivors. This photograph shows a dozen anxious refugees sorting a pile of incoming mail. Postal deliveries could bring good news or bad news. Would an immigration application be approved? Maybe some word on loved ones left behind. The Shanghai refugees' lives were on hold, just like the lives of millions of refugees throughout the world today. My father always hoped that his intimate portraits of the dispossessed would move people and governments to action. Dad captured a broad portrait of the daily life in China, just as he did in America when he was a photographer for the New Deal. He photographed urban scenes like this Shanghai image, and fishing boats on the Yangtze River. When Dad returned home from China, he took an important position at Look magazine. Over the next 25 years, during the golden age of magazine photography, he served as the photographer and director of photography at Look magazine. Look was about people and culture. The magazine carried heavily illustrated, in-depth feature articles on politics, international affairs, and controversial subjects like segregation, mental health, and the labor movement. It was in fierce competition with the news-oriented Life magazine. During the post-war boom, during the post-war boom years, before television dominated the media landscape, Look and Life were enormously influential publications and read by millions of Americans. Over 25 years, Arthur Rothstein created hundreds of picture stories for Look magazine on topics from medicine to fashion to food. Almost every issue of Look featured a food picture, and Dad loved shooting food. So as Look's director of photography, he often assigned himself to take the food pictures. Dad also enjoyed photographing New York City scenes. He took this unusual shot of a construction worker playing the bagpipes to relax on his lunch break. Look, there's the Empire State Building back there. See it? That's how you know you're in New York. With our few remaining minutes of this presentation, I'll tell you about a few other aspects of Dad's career. He made every effort to give back to the photography community. He hired and mentored many photographers, including a young man you may have heard of. He later became a film director. His name was Stanley Kubrick. Dad co-founded the American Society of Magazine Photographers, the ASMP, to protect and promote the rights of photographers. He taught at several schools, including Columbia University's School of Journalism. He wrote countless columns and articles and published 9 books, including 2 textbooks. We're obviously just scratching the surface of Dad's 50-year career. There's so much I didn't even get to cover. For instance, he photographed 9 American presidents, from Roosevelt to Reagan, and many celebrities. Here's Salvador Dali and his mustache. This is the glamorous and talented singer and actress Eartha Kitt. And here is Olympic decathlon gold medalist Bruce Jenner. Arthur even covered the occasional celebrity wedding. That's actor Tony Curtis on the left in the receiving line at his wedding to actress Janet Leigh. The other fellow in the middle with Janet is actor-comedian Jerry Lewis. It looks like Jerry just asked Tony, "May I kiss the bride?" After Look magazine ceased to print in 1971, Arthur became the photo editor at Parade, the most widely read magazine in America. For this cover, Dad had a little fun using himself as model. One of his first assignments for Parade in 1972 was a cover story on Austrian diplomat Kurt Waldheim. He had just been installed as Secretary General of the United Nations. At the photo shoot, while Arthur was trying to get Waldheim to smile and relax for his family portrait, Dad made small talk. He said, "I used to work for your outfit." Mr. Waldheim, who would later try to conceal his Nazi past during his campaign for the Austrian presidency, replied nervously, "What outfit?" Arthur explained innocently, "I worked for the United Nations Relief Agency in China." Dad told Secretary Waldheim that there had been a hitch. In 1946, Dad had packed his China photographs, including those he took in the Shanghai Ghetto, in a metal box for shipment home. But unfortunately, the box never arrived, and Dad had been unable to find his lost pictures for 25 years. Waldheim said, "Perhaps I can help you, Arthur." A week later, Dad received a note directing him to a UN Archives warehouse. After some digging, they unearthed his dusty but unopened box, and the photographs inside were in pristine condition. So that's the hidden history of my father's recovery of his lost photo essay on the Jewish refugee community in Shanghai. Both my parents were photographers, visual storytellers. For much of my childhood, my mother, Grace, had a portrait studio and was also the official photographer for the city of New Rochelle, New York, where we lived. I'll end my presentation with just a few family photos and a quotation that perfectly expresses my father's approach to photography. It seemed that Dad knew everyone and everyone knew Dad. This is a nice selfie of Dad with dear friends, photographers Ansel Adams and Dorothea Lange. Here's the quote. Ansel Adams said, "You don't take a photograph just with a camera. You bring to the act of photography all the pictures you have seen, all the books you have read, all the music you have heard, and all the people you have loved." Okay, that's my presentation. I think we have time for some questions.
That was unbelievable, Annie. Thank you so much. As someone who's been working with your father's photography the last few years, actually, but specifically about Shanghai, I didn't even know the breadth and depth of the photographs that he captured, and it was so enlightening.
Oh,
Thank you so much for sharing it.
my pleasure.
I'm wondering, was that a photograph of you or your sister in the last slides?
Yes, those were family photographs at the end, yes. I love the one of Dad on the blanket in the park with me on his lap. I was a new baby, and my brother sleeping folded up, and Dad has a cigar in his hand, and he's reading the New York Times. I love that picture.
He's led such an incredible life.
Yes, he
so
did.
As a reminder, if anyone has any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. We have a question for you, Annie. How much time did your father actually spend in the city of Shanghai?
I don't know. Do you know, Brody? I'm asking my husband. He might know.
6 months?
About 6 months, Brody thinks.
Certainly in China, yeah.
Yeah.
He was living in Shanghai.
After the war.
Yeah, it was after the war. When the war ended,
Your father lived through.
he was in Shanghai when the war ended.
Almost a year.
Sorry?
About a year.
Oh no, he just changed that. He said almost a year. Sorry, we didn't have the right answer.
So your father lived. Oh, it's okay. Your father lived through such a pivotal, transformative time in modern history, and he's clearly photographed so many unbelievable events that students are still learning about in school. Do you think that there is one in particular that resonated with him more?
Oh, gee. I don't know. Can you think of anything, Bertie? Well, yeah, obviously the dust storm was pivotal. He took the most famous photograph he ever took when he was 20 years old. And then he had a long career after that. I don't know. He photographed so many people and places and had so many great stories. I mean, you want to hear a great story about a president? United States president?
Of course.
I'll tell you a good story. So Dad was photographing Gerald Ford, right? And he was in the Oval Office, and President Ford was seated, and Dad was telling him exactly how he should situate himself, and he noticed that there was a white Band-Aid on the president's thumb, and he didn't want to see a white Band-Aid in a presidential portrait. So he asked the president, he said, "Mr. President, do you think I could run out for a flesh-colored Band-Aid instead of having that white Band-Aid?" And the president said, "Well, no, Arthur, because I get my Band-Aids free from the Navy, and the Navy uses white Band-Aids." I thought that was a great story. What had happened is that the president...
And so the white...
Sorry?
Oh, no, I was going to say, so the white Band-Aid stayed?
The white Band-Aid stayed, and it's in the presidential portrait. And what the story behind the Band-Aid was that he was opening a can of pipe tobacco, and he cut his finger. And, you know, people used to make fun of him and call him a klutz, but he was very, very athletic. He was not a klutz. And anyone can have an accident, right? Can cut their finger on a piece of metal. So oh, I know what I also wanted to tell you about Dad's 3D exographs. So Dad spent about 13 years developing a camera that would take three-dimensional photographs. They look three-dimensional to the naked eye. You didn't have to wear special glasses. You could just look at it and it looked three-dimensional. And it was called the Exograph. And he was working for Look magazine at the time, and they footed the bill. They paid for this, all the research. And then they decided to take the first 3D exograph and put it in Look magazine. And it appeared, so if you bought your Look magazine, I don't remember the date of it, but sometime in 1964, you would open it up, and there would be a three-dimensional image. Pretty amazing. And they used the Exograph. Look magazine also published a magazine called Venture magazine. It was a high-end travel magazine, and every one of Venture's covers was an Exograph, was a three-dimensional image.
Do you have any examples of these? This is incredible to... This is like the original 3D
I don't have
printer.
them in hand. I have lots and lots of them. We bought every Venture magazine we could get our hands on the internet. But if you go online and put in Exograph or put in Venture magazine cover, you'll see them. They're pretty remarkable.
So we have a question from the audience about where can they see more of your father's photography, either from Shanghai or elsewhere, in addition to just coming to Holocaust Museum LA? Where can they see more of his work?
I will tell you, Brody and I manage the Arthur Rothstein Legacy Project, and we have a website, and there's a lot of information and many, many images on the website. We also have a Facebook page, the Arthur Rothstein Legacy Project Facebook page, where we have 30,000 followers. And every week we publish an educational picture story. So they can not only see Dad's images, but they can see the story behind the image.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a fun thing. You should check them out. They're a lot of fun, the picture stories.
What an incredible way to honor your father's legacy.
It really is. And also another thing people can do is they can go online to the Library of Congress, because all of his New Deal photographs, all the pictures he took while working as a government photographer, and all the other government photographers, their work, everything is available through the Library of Congress. And you can even, it's amazing. You could just pick out a photographer and look at their work, study their work. It's fabulous. The Library of Congress.
Going a little bit back to the Shanghai experience specifically, what do you think made your father the right person to photograph the desperate sort of experience of the Jewish refugees in Shanghai?
I am sure that his early life, being the child of immigrants, and knowing the stories, the harrowing stories. I remember one story my grandpa, Dad's father, told me about walking across 5 countries because the Cossacks wanted him for as a replacement during which war was it? The Japanese-Russo War or something. Just the stories were incredible, and I'm sure that all of the stories that he heard and his fascination with the plight of people who, through no fault of their own, were these people just wanted to live their lives, and here they were having to go all the way to Shanghai to survive World War II. Right?
So you've been using your father's artwork and photography to educate generations of students. Given the world that we're living in today, how do you think students can continue to learn from these images of historic moments?
By just studying them, by learning more stories, by talking to survivors while the survivors are still here with us to tell their stories. I think it's so important. It's so important to get the stories from the actual people who lived the experience, and that's the best thing they can do. Go to the Holocaust Museum and look at the recordings of people. There are actually people telling stories at our exhibit. It's a marvelous thing. We should take advantage of these people while they're still here with us.
Yeah, when we had the exhibit opening, there were Shanghai survivors posing in front of your father's photographs.
I was
saying,
so moved.
This is what our childhood looked like this is what we remember. And that was, I think, remarkable.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. And it's great, too, that people are able to tell their stories now, because I think they were so traumatized that for a long time people didn't want to talk about it. And now finally you can really, George Kolber, who gave a talk upstairs at the Holocaust Museum, LA. He gave a talk about his book that he wrote. What's the name of that book? It's a great book. Thrown Upon the World. That's what it's called, Thrown Upon the World. Okay, I know I'm doing an ad for George, but this is a great story about the experiences of a family who had to leave Europe and get to Shanghai, and they survived, and whoa, what an amazing story this is. So, yeah, he's one of the 5 families his family is one of the 5 families that's featured in the exhibition.
I mean, we should just have you do all of our marketing and PR for the exhibit.
Are you selling the book at the museum? You should, because
yes.
Yeah, great. I hope he sells
And of course, we have some of George's family artifacts. But, you know, is there, I think, you were saying a little bit about how it's incredible that we have survivors now sharing their experiences. Did you find that your father had a hard time sharing maybe difficult things he photographed with you, or how did he express?
No, he did not. He loved talking about his experiences. He has 4 children, right? And each of us had a totally different experience listening to Dad. He would tell us each different stories, and then we would talk to each other and find out new things about Dad that we didn't know. And Dad loved to share his experiences. Unfortunately, when I was a child, I didn't realize his accomplishments. I wish I had known. I would have asked him more questions. I had to wait until I was a grown-up to find out that my dad was Arthur Rothstein, the famous social documentary photographer.
I think that's very common, that we all wish that we could have asked the questions of our parents or grandparents that we weren't able to in the moment of being a child.
Fact,
do you have a favorite era of his work?
Oh, do I have a favorite era? Well, yeah, the New Deal. If you go to our Facebook page, you'll see that it's my very favorite era, because we have, as I said, so many picture stories. We've been able to research so many images, and now the Library of Congress has rescanned. They are now rescanning all of their images. Before, not all of them were crispy, clean, and clear, and now they're just rescanning them all, so they're all beautiful. What have you got there? Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. One more thing about Dad that Brody just reminded me of, it's really important, is that he was very much into mentoring. He understood the value of mentoring, of passing down craft and helping people develop. That, I think, is something that is very important in every field, for people to be mentors and have mentors. So that's something I learned about Dad much later in life. And in fact, one of his, I'm very friendly with 2 of his mentees, or 3 actually. and one of them is going to be 100 years old this year, Tony Vaccaro. He's a wonderful photographer. You could look him up. Another is a fabulous guy, named Chester Higgins Jr. And Dad mentored him when he was a young man at Look Magazine, when Chester was a young man at Look Magazine. And he became, he met Dad at his office, and Dad said, "Chester, why do you want to be a documentary photographer, a photojournalist?" And Chester, who's Black, said, "Because I don't like the way my people are portrayed in the press. And if that isn't a good reason to want to be a documentary photographer, I don't know what is." So Chester was just honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award, and I got to go to the ceremony, and it was just, I'm so proud of him. So this is one of my dad's mentees.
I mean, it's really...
Yeah, he was a New York Times photographer for, what, 35 years or something, 40 years, a long time. He just retired.
What a remarkable life your father had, in not only the stories he was able to tell with his camera, the lives that he changed with bringing the stories from across the world to homes across America, but then also to know that he also touched individual people and really inspired them to tell their own stories and represent their own communities. And I think that's such a remarkable piece of who your father was. And we're so grateful for you sharing him with us.
Well, thank you very much, Georgiana. It's been just a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So we have one final question, which is, so in addition to your father's photographs being exhibited at Holocaust Museum LA, are there other places physically that people can go and see his photographs?
Yes, you can go, if you live near Chicago, you can go to the Illinois Holocaust Museum and Education Center, where there's another beautiful exhibition of Dad's Shanghai photographs. And he has a large collection at the New York Public Library and at Columbia University, and as I said, at the Library of Congress. And if you look for him, you'll find him. He's all over the place. He has archives everywhere.
Well, we're also hoping that our exhibition, Hidden Histories, Recounting the Shanghai Jewish Experience, will continue to travel as well. And more and more cities and communities can learn more about Arthur Rothstein's visionary work and the way in which he was able to capture this pivotal transitional moment in the lives of the Jewish refugees in Shanghai.
Thank you.
So thank you,
that would be so
Annie.
Great. You're welcome. Thank you, Jordana.
And thank you everyone for joining us for this talk today. I won't say thank you for joining us during the evening, because I know some of you might be in Hong Kong. So good morning to those in China across the sea.
She's talking to you, Evie. My sister lives in Hong Kong.
We are so pleased to have everyone here. If you continue to be interested in additional virtual programs, tomorrow, Thursday, May 26th, we'll have a survivor speaker speaking live on our Facebook page at 11 Pacific time. Her name is Anne. Anne was an Italian Jew who experienced both living under the Nazi ally in Italy and then after the Nazi German invasion. If you're interested, don't miss that. If you are interested in learning more about our hidden history programs and all things related to Shanghai, next Tuesday, May 31st at 4 p.m., myself and our Chief Curator of Collections, Christy, will be doing an Inside the Acid-Free Box, Shanghai Jewish Life During the Holocaust, exploring some of our primary source artifacts that were unable to make it onto the exhibit floor. So you'll be seeing a behind the scenes look in addition to the 104 artifacts in the exhibition. And then on Thursday, June 9th at 11,
That's going to be great. Yeah.
Thursday, June 9th at 11 a.m., we will have W. Michael Blumenthal speaking. He is a Jewish survivor from Nazi Germany who lived in Shanghai, and experiences are reflected in Arthur Rothstein's photographs. And then, of course, save the date, Thursday, July 9th at 11 a.m. Pacific, we will have another Shanghai survivor from Lawrence Tribe, who is a renowned constitutional law scholar and a friend of Annie's. His law students include people like President Barack Obama. So we'll be very interested in learning about how his experiences shaped him. Again, you can come to Holocaust Museum LA in Los Angeles if you're interested in seeing more of the exhibitions. If you're living abroad, we are happy to bring more information of the exhibit to see more photographs and videos so you can see it virtually. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Annie, thank you for sharing your father's incredible life with us and giving us an opportunity. Thank you from us. And we look forward to seeing you soon.
Bye, everybody.